right, thanks for having me. I'm the guy that has to talk about infrastructure when it doesn't quite go so well as planned. uh, so I'm from the Office of Highway Safety, and like he said, I'll talk about a bridge collapse investigation that we started and are still doing, but we did already have released some findings from it. And then I'll look at the battery electric bus fires, and first look at a background with some electric car investigations that we conducted. So the NTSB is an independent federal agency. We investigate crashes in all modes of travel: aviation, marine, railroad, gas pipelines, and then of course highway safety, where I come from. And being independent, we're not part of the Department of Transportation, and so we can make safety recommendations to anybody we like, although we don't have any regulatory authority or law enforcement power. So I thought the best way to introduce the Office of Highway Safety is just to touch a couple of examples on the types of investigations we do. We do partial automation crashes, including all the other types of crashes. And some of the photos up there represent some past investigations we did. We have current issues and recommendations that on level 2 automated systems that look at improving driver monitoring and engagement and the limitations of the operational design domain. We also look at advanced driving systems. There hasn't been a lot of that activity out there, at least from incidents, but we have a couple of crashes we've investigated. One was an autonomous shuttle in Las Vegas, and another was, oh, that little thing just disappeared, a test vehicle crash in Tempe. And the issues that we're looking at for those are mitigating the risks of testing these vehicles on public roads, which a lot of municipalities are dealing with, and the risk management of ADS and development of the operator oversight. And I'll note that the NTSB, we're not trying to tell the vehicle manufacturers how to design or develop these vehicles, but we're looking at sort of the safety management of them. So now turning to the bridge collapse. This was the Fern Hollow Bridge, which collapsed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania back in January of 2022. It was you can see from the photo there, if you can see the red transit bus on there and some of the other vehicles, it was a very large scale collapse. Luckily, there were no fatalities and just a couple of serious and minor injuries, but it was a pretty big event. And so we've already issued an initial report. It has a long, complicated title at the top there, but basically it deals with prioritization and completion of follow-up actions for the uncoated weathering steel, which was how the structure was built. Basically, we found that there was extensive corrosion and deterioration of the bridge, basically from the accumulation of water and debris preventing the protective patina that an uncoated weathering steel structure requires. And so if you're thinking about maintenance, yep, that's what it was. And it wasn't just that they weren't doing the maintenance. Interestingly, they had been doing good inspections. They had even done some repairs, such as repairing downspouts and things like that. But it was some of the more complicated portions of the process to do follow-up actions and to recognize what the bridge inspections were telling them, which led to the long-term corrosion of the structure. And you can see the photos on the bottom there, almost 10 years apart, and just illustrate some of the degradation of the bridge that was there. So we thought, okay, if this can happen on this bridge, is it possible that it's happening on other bridges? And so we did inspections of other bridges in Pennsylvania, and lo and behold, we found that incomplete maintenance and some of the similar problems were affecting other bridges. And so we felt the need to get out there and get the word out quickly, and that's why we produced that interim report. I'm not going to read the whole recommendation there, but it was to the Federal Highway Administration to coordinate with the local DOTs and bridge operators to make sure that they do their maintenance properly, and again with those sort of follow-up activities like I had mentioned. The work on this investigation is still ongoing as we're developing a better understanding of how they determine the critical components, the details of their inspection and maintenance processes, and then also how they accurately develop the capacity ratings for the bridges. And so there will be a full report that gets released with a board meeting, a public board meeting in early of 2024. Okay, so switching to the battery electric buses. So I mentioned that there's some background work here. There was a report that we issued in 2020 that involved electric cars, and I'll go through really quickly what those investigations found. But this report has the results of that, and that background feeds into the 3 transit bus fires that we looked at, one that occurred in Hamden, Connecticut, Indianapolis, and Pittsburgh. So the first car fire that we investigated was in Lake Forest, California in August of 2017. The car lost control, went through a ditch, hit a culvert, as you see there by the red arrow. That ruptured the battery pack, and then the car traversed across the street and into a house. You can see the photo on the right, the white Tesla there in the driveway. You can see that it's on fire, and the house itself is on fire as well. This created a lot of challenges for the first responders because they weren't understanding why they couldn't get the house to extinguish. And it was because the battery of the electric vehicle was reigniting through thermal runaway. And it wasn't until they pulled the vehicle onto the driveway and saw that it was the battery that was causing the problem. Then they had further problems trying to extinguish the fire. Several hours later, this is you can see it's now dark. They realized after a while that they had to crib the vehicle up on wood blocks, so that's the photo on the left, and spray the water underneath the car in order to cool down that battery and stop the thermal runaway. And back here in 2017, the guidance wasn't as good as it is today, and they were still understanding how to deal with these fires, and they're still learning as we speak. Then, to make matters worse, they loaded it onto a flatbed tow truck, and the grainy picture there is from a cell phone video from one of the firefighters. The batteries reignited. One of the mechanisms of the reignition is the movement of a damaged battery can cause short circuits in the battery and reignite the fire. So we looked at another crash in Mountain View, California. You might have noticed that this crash was also part of a level 2 automated systems investigation. So we have a couple of reports that deal with this crash. But it showed a lot of the similar types of things that we saw in the first one, problems for the first responders, problems with dealing with the highway being closed for several hours, things like that. And then when the car was moved to a storage yard, and actually we were on scene investigating it, we collected the electronic data out of the vehicle, which shifted around the damaged components. And it wasn't apparent at the time, but we must have created a short circuit because later on that night, as you can see from security footage on the photo on the right, the car reignited. And so the fire department had to come and put the thing out. And so it again highlighted issues with how you deal with these vehicles and some of the challenges that exist. We looked at one more crash that ruptured the battery compartment and caused a fire. This one was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It had, again, some of those same issues, and then also highlighted some storage safety issues. The bottom right photo shows the battery pack with a bunch of debris on top of it, like a door and the electric motor and some battery modules. And that's really not a safe way to store that debris. And so we had developed a pretty good understanding of what was happening with these types of crashes that rupture the battery compartment and cause the fire. But we picked up one more investigation, and this one was in Hollywood. And it was not a crash. It was an internal battery failure of the vehicle that just started the vehicle on fire. The driver had plenty of time to move over to the side of the road, get out of the car. He even went back into the car to pull his belongings out of it. By the time, so the firefighters arrived, they put out the visible flames, but then, as you see in the photo on the right, the car is still smoking. And what firefighters do is they don't want to stop until all smoke is done. And so this firefighter is looking very confused there as he's trying to figure out, well, where do I put the water? How much water do I put on? When do I stop? And so these kinds of issues about giving good guidance to the first responders was critical. So we gathered up those investigations into the report, and we found two basic safety issues. One was to improve the guidance for the emergency response guides, and the other was in gaps in safety standards for high-speed, high-severity crashes. Basically, that's getting towards the stranded energy issue. Stranded energy is that extra energy that remains inside the battery, a damaged battery, which can cause those reignitions. And on the right, you see there's an ISO standard format for first responders for these emergency response guides that have the same colors and all that, so that a first responder knows exactly where to go to find the information. So the recommendations, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but those recommendations are all pointed at improving those emergency response guides and making sure that if there's vehicle-specific information that's required. So if you're going to a bus, the location of the batteries are very different than a car. You know the vehicle-specific things that are important to make the right decisions. So now I'll go on to the transit bus fires. This one was in Hamden, Connecticut in June of 2022. It was a 2021 New Flyer. It had failed to charge properly the previous day. The next day, it started to smoke and pop and catch fire. The fire department arrived. They evacuated the building. They pushed it outside. The firefighters didn't see any. The event kind of died down. They didn't really see much, so they left. Well, then it reignited a few minutes later because they hadn't really put it out. And so they were, in that similar learning process to what we saw with the vehicle fires. After the event, they've upped their training and they've done some enhanced temperature monitoring to try to catch this sooner in the future. Another one occurred in Indianapolis. This one was in June also of 2022. They had actually had a transit bus catch fire a couple years earlier, and which was good for that. Well, it wasn't good for them, but at least it prompted them to create some procedures and a designated isolation area, so they were a little better prepared. This was a 2015 Complete Coachworks bus. These are actually diesel buses that are pulled out of service and converted into a fully electric bus. This one was charging at the time. They similar to the other one, they pulled the alarm. The firefighters came, they moved the bus. First, they moved buses away from it inside, and then when they could, they moved it outside and dealt with it. This time, they knew how to cool down those batteries and make sure that it doesn't reignite. What's happening with this is they're decommissioning that fleet, and that transit authority is ordering a new fleet of buses. And then the last one is in Philadelphia. This occurred in November of 2022. The fleet was actually being reintroduced after being stored for 33 months due to some structural and warranty issues with the company. And it was a 2016 Proterra electric bus. It also caught fire while charging. And this one was the automatic sprinklers in the building activated. The fire department responded. They applied some water, moved the bus outside. And then in this case, they actually created a pool of water, which you see in the bottom right photo. Those are actually concrete barriers with black plastic and then water and sand to flood water up high enough to flood the batteries. There's some debate on whether or not that's really the right approach. And those buses are being recalled, and after they discovered the problems with these buses, they're being recalled. So all of these point to basically there's still a fair amount of confusion and information that needs to be developed to really know how to handle these fleets, both from a safety management perspective and just how to deal with it when something bad does happen. So this page here is just a list of resources. If you're interested in these types of lithium-ion battery type educational stuff, it's broken down into some guidance and some research, but just provides you with a bunch of information that you can use if you need it. And then just a closing observation is that, like looking at the bridge collapse, it occurred after there were inspections and sort of known things that were happening, but it still occurred. And same with the bus fires. There were indications on most of those cases that the bus was either having problems or they had other issues. And so it really illustrates the requirement for a robust safety management process. So that's it for me. Thank you.